Hyanka. Excellence you can hear. Let's find out.
Let's hook this amp up to the amp dyno and see what kind of power it makes. Starting with the 4 ohm test, we're keeping an eye on this light right here. When it turns on, we've hit 1% total harmonic distortion. That happens at about 550 watts. Now we watch this light here. When it turns on, we're clipping, and we get about 560 watts at clipping. So what does that tell us, and what the heck is this amp? This is the new CDP 1500D monoblock amp from Hyanka, or is it Hyanka? I never know. Before we do the 1 and 2 ohm test, let's go over all of the quirks and features. On this side of the amp right here, we have lights for power and protect, a plug for the bass knob. Here's the bass knob. It's all plastic. It uses a telephone jack style connector. It has right and left RCA inputs, a bass boost switch that lets you add 6 or 12 dB of boost, a gain control, a low pass filter, and an infrasonic filter. And yeah, I know it says subsonic filter, but the correct name for that is an infrasonic filter. Tell me down in the comments what you think about this shiny heatsink that runs along both sides of the amplifier. I think it's a nice touch.
Very distinctive style.
On the top of the amp, it has a bunch of logos and graphics. Apparently, it's an Aquarius series. Up in the upper right-hand corner, we have some Asian-style lettering and the word Kazan. According to Wikipedia, this is a popularized version of a battle standard, you know, like a flag you'd carry into battle, with phrases from Sun Tzu's Art of War. As swift as wind, as gentle as forest, as fierce as fire, as unshakable as mountain. At 8.65 pounds, it definitely weighs less than a mountain, and at 15 by 6 by 2.36 inches, it's also a lot smaller. Well, what about the power ratings? You just saw me pull about 550 watts out of it into a 4 ohm resistive load. Well, the 4 ohm power rating is 656. Maybe that's the gentle forest part. Let's try it at 2 ohms and see what happens. Well, it's rated for 1106, and at 1% total harmonic distortion, I get 917. Running up to clipping, we get 942. Full disclosure, Hyanka did send this amp to me to test and make a video. That has no impact on the test itself. Before we do any more testing, let's check out the connections on the other side of the amplifier. It has angled terminals. Well, the set screws themselves are angled, but the wire goes in straight. And the terminals are really kind of deep, so to get a good connection, I had to strip off some extra insulation. And I had trouble getting the set screws to bite into the wire properly without adding a wire ferrule and placing that ferrule at the very end of the wire. It made for a bit of an ugly connection. And here's an odd quirk: because those screws go in at such an angle, you can actually see where it starts to cut threads into the wire ferrule. All the rest of the connections are the exact same style with that angled set screw. You'll also notice this amp has 2 sets of terminals for the speaker wire. This seems to confuse a lot of people. It's just one channel with 2 sets of connections to make it easier to hook up 2 subwoofers in parallel. Some people will say that this amp is internally bridged. Please stop saying that. Bridged means that you've taken 2 channels and connected them together. You can't bridge a mono amplifier since it only has 1 channel. Now, a full bridge amplifier is something a little bit different. We'll save that for another day. When I get finished with the 1 ohm test, I'm going to hook it up to a subwoofer to see how it does, because you will get a different result on a reactive load on an actual speaker or a subwoofer compared to the results you get with resistors, so keep watching. You may have noticed the amp did not have an onboard fuse. I was not able to find a fuse rating inside the manual, so I'm going to use a 150 amp fuse because this is supposed to be a 1500 watt amp. And even though it has 1500 on the box and on the amplifier, if you look at the actual power ratings in the manual and on Amazon, this is supposed to be a 1635 watt amp into a 1 ohm load. Let's see what happens. We get 1267 at 1% THD, and at clipping we get just over 1400 watts. So I wasn't able to get 1500 out of this amp, much less the 1635 listed in the manual. You'll notice from the video that the voltage dropped down to 13.8. If I had some more power on tap, it might have given a little bit more output. But the results between the 3 tests were consistent. It never made its rated power. Let's try 40 hertz on a subwoofer. As luck would have it, I happen to have a Hyanka subwoofer on hand. This one is a dual 2 ohm sub with the coils wired in parallel to 1 ohm. And you'll notice right here that when playing 40 hertz, the impedance is a bit higher at 2.6 ohms. This is what's known as impedance rise. Well, we get 937 watts at 1% THD into 2.6 ohms, and I wasn't able to get the amp to clip. Let's check out the amp guts and then try it on some music. I'm not an amp technician, so I really don't know what I'm looking at. I know the names of the parts, but beyond that, I'm not sure how they work together to make power. So anybody watching that is an amp tech, feel free to jump into the comments and tell us if you see anything interesting here on this amp board. Let's try some music with the AMM1 in real-time power mode. If you need a 1400 watt amp, it will do the trick. Whether or not it's the right amp for you really kind of depends on the price, and prices on Amazon can vary day to day, so you'll need to hit the link in the description to check it out for yourself. Before you do that, you really should watch this amp dyno video right up here. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button right down here. Before I go, I need to say thank you to all of my patrons and channel members, with a big shout out to $25 and up patrons: Johnny, Timothy, Jonathan, JD America, and Bo. I'm Justin, this is the DIY Audio Guy YouTube channel, and I will see you on the next adventure.